Hey, what's up everybody? Dustin here with Rocky Mountain ATVMC. Today I'll be showing you how to replace the shock bearings on a KTM 300X CW. The upper and lower shock bearings are what allow the shock to pivot when the bike is in motion, and they also help to provide the suspension with smooth operation. Now after some time in use, the bearings are going to wear out and we'll begin to get some play in them, and then will need to be replaced. So today we're going to show you how to replace the upper and lower shock bearing on a 2015 KTM 300X CW. Now this bike here uses a PDS shock which does not utilize swing arm linkage. Now the process that we show you here today can be used on a lot of KTM dirt bikes. So let's show you how to do it. Now to tell if your shock bearing has gone bad, you can grab your swing arm and hold on to the top of the bike and lift the swing arm and look in this area to see if there's movement. As you can see here, we have quite a bit of play. To do this job, we just need a few basic hand tools. So here we've got a couple picks, flathead screwdriver, punch, pry bar, 3/8" drive ratchet with extension 13mm socket. Then we've got a 1/4" drive ratchet with extension and 6mm socket. Then we've got an 18mm socket which will be used to drive out the upper bearing, a hammer, seal puller, Motion Pro KTM heim joint tool, a torque wrench, a heat gun. In the event that the bearings are very difficult to remove, you can heat the area of the bearing. We've got some grease, rag, safety glasses, and contact cleaner. And then we've got a replacement bearing kit from Pivot Works, which is the bearing and seal kit for shocks. Now before performing any work on your bike, always be sure to reference your service manual for proper procedures, torque specs, and safety information. To start, place the bike on a suitable working stand. Next, you can remove the mudguard, remove the lower shock bolt. Now if the bolt is very difficult to remove, you may want to place a punch in the other side and slowly drive it out with a hammer. Remove the upper shock bolt, then you can remove the shock. At the swing arm, remove both the heim joint spacers. Remove bearing seals with the seal puller. Be careful not to scratch the inside of the shock bearings journal. Arrange the heim joint tool into this arrangement. Place the tool into the heim joint and drive it out with a hammer. To remove the heim joint, you may need to heat the area in which it resides. Now, if you don't have the heim joint tool, you can use a socket that's the same size as the heim joint. Once removed, thoroughly clean the bearings journal. Before installing the new bearing, you'll want to remove the rear brake line from its stay so that you have clearance for the bearing and the tool. Lubricate the bearing and the bearing journal with the provided grease. Now I just want to take a brief moment and show you why this tool from Motion Pro is really awesome to have. Now when it comes to installing the spherical bearing, it can be a little bit difficult to get it perfectly centered, but Motion Pro has solved that problem for us. So you're going to disassemble the tool like this. You're going to place the spherical bearing onto the middle portion of the tool. Then we can take the end piece with the recessed side. We're going to place it on here like so. Now as you can see, it's not exactly square, so we're going to push it together and that'll square it up. Then we can take the handle, we're going to place it into the top side like so. Now we're ready to install it. Now what's awesome about this is as we begin to drive it into the bearings journal, this shoulder right here is going to stop it so that the bearing is sitting in the center. Then we can just disassemble the tool with the bearing sitting inside. Now if you do not have a cool tool from Motion Pro, you can use a socket that's about the same size diameter as the bearing. Now you want to be careful when you're driving this into position and make sure that you're not driving it too far to one side or the other. So as you drive it into position, make sure to remove the socket, take some measurements to make sure that you're on center. Install bearing seals and seat them. Again, you'll have to rearrange the Motion Pro tool in order to drive the bearing seals. Drive the seals until they are flush with the swing arm. Lightly apply some grease, then install the new spacers. To service the shock's top bearing, we're going to take and place the shock into our vise with soft jaws. Next, we can take our hammer and punch and remove these spacers or bushings. Next, we can remove the upper seal. Now there is a snap ring, or a spring ring that sits inside of here. It may be a little difficult to remove. If it proves to be too difficult, you can take a socket that's the same diameter as the spherical bearing. You can drive the bearing down just a little bit so that it seats against the other snap ring, and that should give you enough room to remove the other side. All right, so once we get this snap ring out, we're going to take our shock out of the vise, flip it around so that we can access the other side. Next, we'll pull out the other seal and C-clip from the shock. Then we can drive out the bearing. You may need to heat the aluminum around the area of the bearing. Just so you are aware, the heim joint tool will not fit in the upper bearing. All right, so now we're ready to clean the inner diameter of where the bearing will reside, and we also need to clean up our snap rings because they will be reused. Now once the inner diameter has been cleaned, we can take some of our bearing grease. We're going to coat the outside of the bearing and then we can get it installed. Now before we set the bearing, we need to take one of our circlips and install it on the other side so that once we drive the bearing, it will seat against it firmly. Once you get the circlip installed, just double check and make sure that it's seated inside of its groove. And we're going to take our shock out of the vise and we're going to flip it around, then we'll lubricate and drive the bearing. Now when you bottom the bearing out against the snap ring, it may change pitch so you know that it's driven against the snap ring. Now if you accidentally damage your circlips in the removal process, you'll definitely want to get these replaced. And again, once your circlip is installed, be sure to make sure that it's seated in its ring landing. We'll take some grease, apply a small amount to the sealing ring. We'll press them in both sides so that they will stay in the inner diameter. Then we will take each bushing, set it into each side of the upper part of the shock bearing, and then we will mount it into the vise so that the vise will press these two into the bearing. Now you may want to remove your soft jaws so that the bushings are able to seat squarely and evenly. Make sure they're nice and square, and then we can press them together with the vise. All right, so now that we've got our bushings set into position, we can now take this back over to the bike and get it installed. Reinstall the shock onto the bike. Insert the top bolt and torque to 59 foot-pounds. Raise the swing arm to meet the lower shock's clevis. Insert the bolt and torque to 59 foot-pounds. Reinstall the mudguard. And that's all there is to it. Replacing the upper and lower shock bearing will definitely help to keep your bike and its shock in good operating condition. Now, if you have any questions as to what we've done here today, feel free to leave a comment below and we'll be sure to get an answer back to you. Also, you can find all the replacement parts and serviceable replacement items that you need for your bike right here at RockyMountainATVMC.com, so be sure to check it out. And see our YouTube channel and subscribe for more how-tos, product spotlights, and top fives. All right, that's it for me. I'm Dustin with Rocky Mountain. Thanks for watching and keep the wrenches turning.